views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, I'm Jose Guerra Lopez. Welcome to one more episode of the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Today, I have the pleasure to welcome Steven LaBrie, a Mexican-American opera singer, named among the 5 leading lyric baritones to watch in opera news. Welcome, Steven.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
So, can we start just by asking you, were you always interested in coming into the opera scene since you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I started when I was like in 5th grade. I grew up in Dallas, and we went on a field trip to the Dallas Opera to see La Boheme, and we were there, and I was like taken. The scenery, the singing, especially the singing and the music, really grabbed me. So from that point forward, I went back to class and I said, I want to be an opera singer. So from that point forward, I always wanted to sing. Also, another part of it was, singing, when you're a singer, you spend so much time alone, like in a practice room, and I always just loved that. Like, I loved being by myself, just like singing and singing and singing for hours on end. So when I was like at that age, just starting, I was a little antisocial and also kind of bullied in school. So at that point, I like just would go in a room and I would sing by myself for hours.
And what type of music did you sing? Was it opera, or were you growing up in Texas?
Right. At the very, very beginning, it was just like whatever I knew. And then when I started taking voice lessons and I was a teenager, my mother, my mother who's from Mexico, she encouraged me to always sing mariachi and boleros and baladas. So I did all of that type of Mexican music, and I loved that because it is like opera. It's like singing with an orchestra because you have the banda, and it's high and it's low and it's expressive and it's dramatic and it's all the things that you want in opera that excite you with opera, you have with mariachi and you have with Mexican music.
And do you find that the like mariachi, is the technique, is it similar to opera, like in classical training when they're singing with the mariachi, like the way you...
Well, there's, a staple of operatic technique is that you're singing with an orchestra and you have no microphone. And the mariachi bands are loud. So you have to sing over them, you have to be louder than them. And so it is similar, and there's certain things, the singers that I love, the mariachi singers that I love from the past, because I love all the classics, and everything, and they have operatic technique. They have certain aspects of operatic technique that I would say are important to be able to sing that type of music.
And so you were growing up there in Dallas and you were practicing and everything. What made you decide to come to New York? We know that is like the epicenter of the arts,
right?
But was that part of it? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, New York, everyone knows is an epicenter, and you have to be here for a period of time in your life in order to do the auditions and be on the scene and meet people. I initially went to school in Philadelphia at the school. I was actually the youngest person to ever get in to this school called the Academy of Vocal Arts, and it's not... It's not a college, or university. It's also not a conservatory. It's really its own thing. There's no other school like it. All they do is teach opera. So I went there at 18 after high school, and I was there for a few years. I moved to DC for a few years, and 4 years ago, I moved here to New York.
And what venues did you perform here in New York?
In New York, so I have performed in Carnegie Hall. I have performed with New York City Ballet. I've performed at Jazz at Lincoln Center, there at Columbus Circle. And I've done some concerts and recitals around the city.
And do you have not a favorite, but just a memorable experience of performing, like your favorite performance?
Ever?
Yes.
So my favorite show I've ever done is an opera called Florencia en el Amazonas by a Mexican composer named Daniel Catan. It's, first of all, the role that in this opera, it's about, the story is about an opera singer who is going from Colombia to Brazil to do a recital, and she's actually really looking for a lover that she picked her career over this man. So she's actually going back there to hope that he will appear at her concert. And they're going to Manaus. And my character is like this, his name is Rio Lobo. And he's this like magical creature. There's a lot of magic in the opera. There's a magical creature from the river that like saves them, you know? Because as a baritone, a lot of times, you sing the role of the villain or the brother or the mean brother or the guy who's like, you know, molesting women or that type of thing.
Can you explain to our audience like the differences between the tenor and baritone? And because you just said, right, because of a baritone, they ask you to do the villain.
Right.
So why is it? Because of the
It's just,
deep tone?
The tradition of writing was for so long that a tenor and a soprano were, you know, the lovers. And the baritone is the person getting in the way of that. And the bass is like, you know, the father or the sage, or also sometimes the villain, sometimes the funny person. So with Florencia, I finally got to play like this good guy, you know, who's like the Jesus character, who in the end sacrifices himself for to save everyone else's life. Because in the end, there's actually a cholera outbreak in Manaus, and so they don't ever get there. But my character gets on Manaus, and he says, "Don't come here. You know, there's cholera," and he dies.
Oh, okay.
So I liked that kind of change up in, instead of being Don Juan, you know, actually being like this good person who, you know, sings beautiful music, because also the music is spectacular, you know.
That's great. So, Steven, thank you so much for sharing this part of your story. We're going to take a short break, and when we'll return, we'll keep talking about opera and also your career here in New York City.
Great.
Okay? Stay with us. Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Today we're talking with opera singer Steven LaBrie. Steven, so we left up also about talking about your experience moving to New York, going to Philly, right?
Yeah.
So when you were studying, how did you discover that you were a baritone? Or do you discover it? Does your teacher tells you you're a baritone? How does it work?
So, you know, basically with vocal categorization, if you sing with good technique, and you have an open throat, open, relaxed body, your vocal category will decide itself. So if you're a bass, you're a bass because of the way that your body is engineered. If you're a baritone, you're a baritone. And depending on how you develop your voice, you can reach higher notes and lower notes, but the color of your voice and your range are the things that decide, mostly the color of your voice decide. And then there's another tricky thing called passaggio, which is where you go from the middle voice to the high voice.
Your head voice.
Yeah, those things decide what voice type you are.
Okay, and can you explore if you can widen your range or no? Is that something that you cannot do in the opera
It
world?
depends. You know, there are some people who have the ability to be either a soprano or a mezzo, and they can choose based on their temperament, based on what they like to sing, whether they want to be a soprano or whether they want to be a mezzo. Same things with some tenors and baritones. Sometimes they can choose what they want to do. But I think for me it's so clear that I'm a baritone, just based on the color of my voice and my range and the timbre. It's really more about that for me.
And we were talking about the specific characters, right, that tenors play and also baritones. Can you tell us a little bit about is it always, if you have like a French opera or an Italian opera, German opera, is it always the same for the baritones that you're always singing a part that's mostly the villain or the...
It's not always the same. The stories do differ. You know, I just did an opera this summer at Jazz at Lincoln Center, where I was the brother, but I was a good guy. I was like the nice person. Also in La Bohème, Marcello, he's a good person. He's he's not a villain. He's the friend, but he's also a lover. He also has Musetta, who he loves. But they have a different relationship. The story isn't about their relationship as much as it's about Rodolfo and Mimi. So it just varies. It depends. You know, there's like Belcore, which is in Elixir of Love, and he's like, getting in the way of the tenor and soprano. Or there's some operas like Don Giovanni, which is the story of Don Juan. The tenors, Don Giovanni rapes his to-be wife, and so that he gets in the way of that, and he's the villain. But the story is centered around Don Giovanni. So it really is just depending on the opera and the composer and the time period, and what were the operatic musical constructs of the time.
And so, coming here to New York, how did you find the environment of opera? Is it competitive, especially for Latino and Mexican American, or is it just welcoming? Can you tell us a little bit about that world, like jumping into that
Right.
world?
Well, I would say that the any show business is competitive. I mean, I'm speaking from my perspective as an opera singer. So if there's a show business that's not competitive, let me know what it is.
Yes.
But I would say that it is competitive. I have a lot of colleagues that sing the same repertoire as I do. But I'm not so much competing with every single person in the business as much as I'm competing for a certain job in a certain repertoire. So it does narrow it down. However, we're all friends. I would say that I know all of the other baritones out there that are my colleagues, and we're all friends and we support each other. So it's not cutthroat in the way that you're like trying to, murder someone to get a job. You're really just, trying to do your best. Because ultimately, my goal, and I know that, I'm a really hard worker, and I know my colleagues, also work really hard, is, I'm so focused on myself and my career, and constantly bettering my voice, and constantly bettering my technique, and constantly learning languages, and getting, working on my, acting and everything in order to get ahead, from my perspective. So it's not so much that I'm like focused on other people, but it is, the knowledge that it's competitive is there, because it just is.
So those are some challenges that you're mentioning right now, right? Are there any other, like you have to, I don't know, you were saying practice regularly, exercise. Like, is there any other challenges for opera singers that you can tell us?
Well, I would say there's, in my experience, in my opinion, there's never an arrival point. You don't ever get to the point where you're like, okay, I figured out technique, I know fluently every language, I know how to act perfectly in every role that I do. It's always a process. And some days you wake up and your voice is like, wait, have I ever sung a note in my entire life? What happened to my technique? And you have to kind of figure out, maybe I ate too late, maybe I did this, I drank too much, or whatever. It's not always the same. It's always a process. And I had a mentor one time tell me, enjoy the journey. It's not about an arrival point, because you will never arrive. And you get old at some point, and your voice is never the same. It changes throughout your life, because your body changes.
Yes.
So there's no point where you're like, okay, I'm set. I never have to learn a thing again.
And do you think there's a specific challenge for minorities or Latinos in the opera? If you were saying you're competing, or not competing, or you're aiming for the same parts with baritones, is there a specific challenge for Latinos or minorities in the opera world?
Well, yeah. I mean, there has always been, in every field, a challenge for minorities. And I think that we've reached a point in time where we're trying to overcome those things. So there's a lot more colorblind casting. There's a lot more appropriate casting for certain things. So, Yeah, I mean, being Latino is such a range of what that means, because it's not so much always a racial thing as it is a cultural thing and a heritage thing, and it's just so many things, that fall under that umbrella. That sometimes. Sometimes they'll even cast a non-Latino in a role that's meant for a Latino or a Spanish role or something, just because in opera traditionally we have always been voice first. So that's how it should be, in my opinion. And I have to keep qualifying everything, and in my opinion. I think people do respect like the Latin flair that Latino singers bring to music, because I think also that tradition of Mexican music. I'm not entirely versed on all the Latino cultures and their musical styles, but Mexican music, it's like passionate and it's out there, and it has those qualities I was describing earlier that feed right into opera.
Does it help you when you're rehearsing to sing like a mariachi song? Like to start singing a mariachi song when you're rehearsing, or no?
I have to say there's a certain freedom and a certain like flow that like this type of music has, and I incorporate Mexican music into all the recitals I do and all the concerts I do, because it's music that has to be heard, and it's music that a lot of times is even just done by like a tenor, but I'm a baritone, so I I like to have that, it's high and it's loud and it's all of those things. So and it's such beautiful music, and it's timeless. It's like opera in a way too, because people still perform it, like Maria Grever and Agustin Lara and all these composers that are incredible, and are just timeless.
Yes. So I think we have a clip of you rehearsing.
Yeah.
So we're gonna take a little time to take a look at that.
Okay, cool.
Short.
Que aunque pase mucho tiempo, no olvidarás el momento en que yo te conocí. Mírame, pues no hay nada más profundo ni más grande en este mundo que el cariño que te di. Bésame con un beso enamorado, como nadie me ha besado desde el día en que nací. Quiéreme hasta la locura, así sabrás la amargura que estoy sufriendo por ti.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about those challenges, or just like the demand of being an opera singer. I see that you have a piano there, you're rehearsing. So can you tell us just like what does it entail to be an opera singer, like those challenges for you personally?
Well, I would say being an opera singer includes never stopping studying, which I said, kind of said earlier, never an arrival point. So there's that. Also, just you do auditions and you don't get the job. You do competitions, you don't get the award, and you think, God, what's wrong with me? And so you go through this mental kind of thing where you're like thinking, okay, I don't do this well, I don't do this well, and so but then you have to constantly remember, it's so much less about you than it is about whatever happened. That person likes this other person more. Not even maybe not even their singing. Maybe they're friends. Maybe they worked with them before. Maybe they're their mentee. There's no way to know really why you weren't picked. So it's this constant like, you have to believe in yourself. That's the most important thing in this industry, is belief in yourself, that you are good, you have the goods, you know what you're doing, and you're willing to put in the work and continue learning every second.
That's great. Steven, thank you so much for sharing this interesting part also. So let's take a short break. You're watching the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. Welcome back to the Mexican Studies Oral History Project. If you just tuned in, we're talking to opera singer Steven LaBrie. Steven, so now tell me, do you have any specific advice for any young kid that right now is watching and is interested in going into opera?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's not consistent. Opera in the arts is not consistent. You're not going to get a paycheck every week. So if you're okay with that idea, go for it. If you're okay with not always getting what you want, not always, it's difficult and it's challenging, and you have to continue believing in yourself. So always believe in yourself and move forward. The other thing I would say is don't be generic. Everyone has something to bring to the table, and if you embrace the qualities that make you different than other people, then that's what's going to make you great. Because if you become generic and let your voice sound like everyone else's voice, how are you different?
Right, yeah.
Right. Why are you doing this? If you literally sound like everyone, and I'm not saying make a fake voice happen. I'm saying that find your voice,
yes.
Discover what makes you, and don't listen to other people and say, I need to sound like that person. I need to do, that person's working. I need to sound like them. Let people hate you. Let people say, I don't like that voice. It's too this or too that for me. Because someone else will say, wow, I love that voice because it's so much this and so much that. So I would say find your voice and go with that.
That's great. And we were talking also during the break about your time that you spent in Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about why is it so important for you to go back to Rancho El Rey in Nuevo León?
So, okay. So my story is interesting. My mom had financial difficulties, and so at one point we stopped visiting my family in Mexico. And about 5 years ago, I decided to start going back because I wanted to reconnect with my family. So my dad, who's actually American, and his cousin is American, she lives in at the rancho. And she started going there to on a missionary work, and now she was there, she lives there now. So it's a casa hogar that houses kids, and it's small. It's all boys, and it's small. It's about 25, 30 kids. And so she said, come visit. If you're going to be visiting your grandparents, why don't you come visit and stay a while, and you can help the kids learn to read or do whatever. So I said, okay, sure. So I started visiting. I went there the first time, and there was this little boy the very first day. He was the youngest kid at the rancho. His name was Rafael. And he said, I want to learn to read. And so I said, okay, get a book. So he ran to get a book. He comes back with a book, and it's like this really difficult book. And I was like, okay, no, you don't even know letters yet. I was like, go get a simpler book. He comes back with a simpler book. We start going over the letters, and he was just so cute. And so before I know it, I have a shadow. And he's there with me every second, and he wants to learn to read, and he wants to learn math. He wants to learn, and he's so precocious. And so people started calling me his padrino. So eventually, after my time there, I was like, oh, I love this kid. He's like my little brother. I do have a little brother, but it's complicated. I never had a real little brother, and I love this kid. So now I go back every year. His birthday's in May, and I go back in May every year to celebrate his birthday. And I keep in touch with him through my cousin. I sent her clips of me, saying things to Rafael, and he's doing well. He's doing well in school. He has, attention problems. He's very smart.
That's great. That's incredible. Steven, and we're going to close the program, and we're going to share your social media handles and everything. Yeah. So they're going to be down there.
Great.
But would you mind sharing with us your talent? Would you mind singing for us a little bit?
Sure.
Yes?
I would love to.
Okay.
Júrame que aunque pase mucho tiempo, no olvidarás el momento en que yo te conocí. Mírame, pues no hay nada más profundo ni más grande en este mundo que el cariño que te di. Bésame con un beso enamorado, como nadie me ha besado desde el día en que nací. Quiéreme hasta la locura, así sabrás la amargura que estoy sufriendo por ti, por ti.
Steven, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to our viewers also. Don't forget to follow Steven at his social media, at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And don't forget to follow us on our social media at CUNY MSI. We'll see you in the next episode of the Mexican Studies Oral History Project.